Has anyone figured out this one? Usa la pianta o la città on the seguente pagina? Okay, if you want to know the English instructions, they're right there. Yeah. One of the instructions is use the map on the following page. In Italian, okay. Just
map in Italian.
Usa la pianta della città alla seguente pagina. So these are the little gems that, you know, in a book, it tells students to look somewhere for certain information that sometimes they're not going to get.
Pianta della città is the city map.
Pianta della città.
So Pianta is map.
Map. That's one. There's about 10 different ways you can say map in it.
So which kind of classes chose actually the English
I use this book in a class called Proposition 1, and the students were usually kind of studying abroad. And for the ones who are moved on the first day, I'll bring a copy of each and I'll say which design is English and Japanese. Fairly gung-ho. About 80% of the students in the Japanese version. But the ones who begin, we're all doing the exact same thing. It's just that, you know, they're challenging themselves a bit more, and I encourage them. It's fantastic.
80%. You would say 80. So can both
yeah, well, that's why I made 2 editions.
Yeah,
so that it can
map
be used with
fine.
split level classes, so that even the higher level students don't feel like it's too easy. Their general program, we typically everyone uses the Japanese version. So we use 1,000 students times 2 classes. So we can't, just logistically we can't do it. But we will say to students that there's a certain number of English copies. So for students, and they want to trade them in, you know, I'll have a certain number of English copies available that I'm off, and I very rarely get students coming. If you're learning whenever they're time, it's all through English.
What about your verbal instruction? How often do you actually use Japanese to explain the steps in
If it's something that they need to know that it's meta language that they need to know for how to do something linguistically, do that in Japanese. If it's just something about, okay, now get together and let's do this. I'll always do it first in English. I'll get it the first time and it's just wasting forever because it's just like, come on, just we were just talking about it. Okay, we better. All right? All right, if we could just bring it back then, because I don't want to go over today. I hope one of the things you'll have found by trying to do this is that it's not that easy, even when you've got all these words, and for native English speakers, Italian is a hop, skip, and a jump, especially if you speak Spanish or French. You can, I mean, I can read Spanish. I've never studied today because it's so much like Italian, right? You can guess this, but when you look at how much time it takes just to figure out what you're supposed to be doing. In fact, this is a complete crap exercise anyway. This is from an older style grammatical approach where it's just like structural, you know, asking directions that have no bearing whatsoever on your interests or your own ideas. But still, just to get to where you're able to do the activity is a nightmare, right? So if you look at like the English one, obviously it's a lot easier because the language that you need to know jumps out at you. Right? I'm not saying don't do it in English. I'm just saying, just be aware that it's not as easy as it seems for students to be able to pick up on what they're supposed to be doing in class. All right? So just be sensitive to that, that's all I'm saying. The last thing on that page, in terms of linguistic difficulty, on page 14 and 15, where you get to the self-assessment, on page 14, for example, you know, you've got, say, for example, a split-level class. The very bottom is something called the challenge role play. That's called a strategic role play is what they're called. And that's where you throw a twist in the role play that they have not practiced for. It's completely spontaneous language. And again, you let students choose whether they want to do that or not. And more advanced, or you could, well, you encourage students who are really, this is a cakewalk for them, doing this kind of work. If it's, because you do get those students sometimes who are assigned to your class who are way beyond. But you don't want them always doing different stuff. They don't like that. They feel alienated. They want to do what their peers are doing. So you just challenge them with something like this. Now this goes beyond the idea of Japanese or what have you. One of the things you'll find if you go through, particularly with the grammar sections, for example, with this book, there's something where they have to plan their own trip. They have to either go to the internet, it's in the language focus section, they go to the internet, or they go to like a travel agency. They actually have to plan their own trip. So they're not just memorizing this one conversation and repeating it verbatim. What they're going to be able to do is have a conversation where they're going to be interacting with a foreigner and talking about these real ideas they have in their head. So they can learn how to say, I'll probably, or I might, I'm going to, and really have an understanding for what that means. And I think one of the messages that I'd like to leave you with, and I still got a little bit more blogging to do, but when I say, you let your materials talk for you so that you can keep things in English. But the whole point of using L1 support, using Japanese support, is to get your students so that they've learned the basic functions that they need to have real conversations. And then you take them one step away from that, and you let them do it. For the assessment side, it should all be in English. And they will understand when you say, listen, this is now assessment. I want to see how well you can spontaneously use these things you've learned. How much you've practiced, how much you've taken it on board. You cannot use Japanese when you're speaking with me on that. Just like if you're sitting with someone beside on an airplane going to Canada, you'll be very lucky if they speak Japanese. Okay, if it's to and from Japan, maybe, but you have to be prepared at some point in your life to just get by with only English. And when students are doing these kind of role plays, all kinds of spontaneous stuff happens. So they'll stick to the script in the sense of, they'll go through what is appropriate. If it's, for example, asking a person out, there comes a point where they have to hang up the phone. So they have to eventually say, listen, I gotta go, I'll see you later, okay, see you on Wednesday, they'll confirm plans. But what happens in between, there's an awful lot of spontaneous stuff going on. And you made the point, I think it was you, wasn't it, that at the end of class when you say, well, look at what you were able to do, all in English. Students really get geeked on that, they like that. Because most Japanese students are incredibly self-conscious about their English ability. They're incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Unconfident? Is that a real word? They're not confident. They lack confidence about their ability to speak English. And when suddenly you say, well, look what you were just able to do. You just talked for 10 minutes in a way that's completely appropriate. Ruth Weinrib was the one who said that motivation is born out of pragmatic success. When students actually see what they can do in English, there's nothing more motivating than that. And sometimes you have to say to students, look what you're able to do. Patch, 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 good for you. Pat on the back. Right? So all this L1 stuff that we're talking about, eventually, of course, you're cutting them away from that. Just like all the vocabulary in the boxes on the side, when that comes up in later units, it's not, you won't find any more definitions for it. It's already been defined once. When it's recycled, and they see it again, maybe they'll look for it, but they might not have to. They'll have a feeling for what it means, and they'll kind of remember more or less what it means. L1 is a scaffold. It's not a crutch. All right? If you use it if you know why you're using L1 and your students know why you're using it, it's a scaffold, which comes from this whole idea of, it's a Vygotskian idea of, like when you build a building, you start off with a scaffold outside, and you gradually remove the scaffold as the building gets built and can stand on its own foundation. That's what you're doing with students. The L1 is just a support, but again, it's not a crutch. All right. I think that's, in terms of, there's a few, like on page 8, okay, I'm going to go and blatantly try and pin my book here, but if you do ever wind up using this book, there's a support site. I don't have it here, but it's somewhere in the first pages of the book. The www.encounters.jp. It's in the first couple pages. There's the web right there, page 5. You've got that. If you go to that page, there's one-click downloads for, actually for all my books.